Every year when the Nile flooded, billions of cubic meters of water spilled out into the Egyptian desert and simply evaporated, wasted, soaking into sand that never grew anything. Egypt looked at that waste and decided to build one of the largest pumping stations on Earth specifically to stop it, then pump that water 240 kilometers west into the middle of the Sahara. This is the Toshka project, also called the New Valley, a pumping station capable of moving over 1 million cubic meters of water an hour. A main canal named after the ruler of Abu Dhabi who helped pay to build it. A plan to turn nearly 1 million feddans of open desert into farmland and eventually house millions of people in a second Nile Valley that never existed before. And a project that decades later still hasn't become the second Egypt its planners once imagined. Here's the part that sounds almost contradictory. Egypt is one of the driest countries on Earth, and its water supply from the Nile is already a subject of constant negotiation with every other nation the river passes through. And yet, for years, a meaningful share of Egypt's own Nile water simply overflowed into an empty desert depression and disappeared because the infrastructure to actually use it productively didn't exist yet. That waste traces directly back to the Aswan High Dam, completed in 1970, which created Lake Nasser, the largest reservoir built by human hands anywhere in the world. To manage flood years when the lake filled beyond its safe capacity, engineers had already built a spillway canal back in 1978, cut west from the lake into a natural low-lying depression called Toshka, giving floodwater somewhere to go rather than risk overtopping the dam itself. For 2 decades, that spillway sat mostly unused, since Lake Nasser rarely filled high enough to actually trigger an overflow. Then, through the 1990s, a run of unusually high Nile floods pushed the lake up to spillway level, and water finally began pouring west into the Toshka Depression, forming a series of lakes out in the open desert that astronauts on the space shuttle could photograph from orbit by November of 1998. Rather than simply letting that overflow keep evaporating uselessly year after year, Egypt's government, under President Hosni Mubarak, launches the Toshka project in 1997, reframing what had been an emergency safety valve into the foundation of a deliberate national development plan. The core idea is straightforward on paper. Capture a portion of Egypt's Nile water allocation before it can escape into the desert and evaporate, and instead pump it westward through a purpose-built canal system, opening up new farmland and eventually new communities far outside the narrow, overcrowded strip of the Nile Valley, where the overwhelming majority of Egypt's population has always lived. Executing that plan means solving an immediate engineering problem, getting water out of Lake Nasser and up onto ground high enough for gravity to then carry it westward through a canal, since the lake itself sits in a basin lower than the desert plateau the project needs to irrigate. The centerpiece built to solve exactly that problem is the pumping station that eventually gets named after President Mubarak himself, sited on the western shore of Lake Nasser, roughly 8 kilometers north of the original 1978 spillway. The Mubarak pumping station draws water out of the lake through a system of intake tunnels, then lifts it through 24 large pumps against a static head, reported at somewhere between 50 and 54 meters. The vertical difference between the lake's lowest operating level and the elevation of the main canal it needs to feed. That's a substantial amount of lift for a pumping operation working at this scale, and it demands genuinely enormous installed power to sustain, with total capacity across the station's pumps reported at roughly 250 to nearly 400 megawatts, depending on the specific source and phase of the project being described. At full output, the station is designed to move somewhere in the range of 25 to 37 million cubic meters of water a day, translating to a peak discharge capacity of about 1.2 million cubic meters an hour, and an annual pumping capacity that can reach as high as 5.5 billion cubic meters of water, deliberately set at roughly 1/10 of Egypt's entire annual Nile water allocation, under existing international agreements. Equipment operating at this station has to survive conditions few pumping installations anywhere else in the world ever face simultaneously. Ambient desert temperatures climbing past 50 degrees Celsius, frequent sandstorms capable of choking ordinary mechanical equipment with abrasive dust, and the seismic risk present across the wider region. Hundreds of high-efficiency split-case pumps installed across the wider project, including smaller lift stations feeding the canal's branch network further downstream, get specifically engineered and certified to keep operating reliably under exactly those extreme heat, sandstorm, and earthquake conditions, rather than requiring the kind of climate-controlled indoor environment pumping equipment might expect in a more temperate setting. Housing that much pumping machinery in the middle of the desert creates its own design challenge, separate from the pumps themselves. The pump house sits directly on the lakeshore, functioning almost like an artificial island jutting out into Lake Nasser, with intake structures extending into the water and discharge piping running back out to feed the main canal on the opposite side. Engineers have to plan for lake levels that shift substantially between wet and dry years, since Lake Nasser's surface elevation can vary by many meters depending on upstream Nile flow, meaning the intake system has to remain functional across a wide range of water levels rather than being calibrated for a single fixed elevation the way a pumping station on a more stable body of water might be. Once lifted out of the lake, water flows into the Sheikh Zayed Canal, the main artery of the entire project, running roughly 47 to 51 kilometers from the pumping station westward across the desert, with a channel bed roughly 30 meters wide, built with a water level regulator and a dedicated spillway to manage excess flow along its length. The canal carries the name of Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, the ruler of Abu Dhabi at the time, in recognition of a $100 million donation from the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development that helped finance construction and lining of the canal itself, an early example of Gulf capital flowing directly into one of Egypt's largest domestic infrastructure ambitions. From the Sheikh Zayed Canal, 4 separate branch canals extend outward, distributing water toward the specific parcels of reclaimed desert land earmarked for agricultural development. The original master plan envisioned the main canal eventually stretching far beyond its initial completed length, continuing west and then north along a historic desert route known as the Darb al-Arbain, toward the Baris Oasis in Egypt's New Valley Governorate, a total planned distance in the range of 240 to 310 kilometers, depending on which phase of planning document you're reading. In practice, construction on that extended alignment stalled well short of the original target, with surveys around 2012 finding the canal still roughly 60 kilometers short of reaching Baris Oasis at all. Excavating and lining a canal system across this much open desert brings its own set of engineering demands distinct from anything the pumping station itself has to solve. Desert sand along much of the route offers poor natural resistance to water seepage, meaning a large share of the canal's length has to be lined with impermeable material to prevent the water Egypt worked so hard to pump uphill from simply soaking away into the surrounding sand before it ever reaches the fields it's meant to irrigate. Wind-blown sand accumulating in an open channel running through active desert terrain also demands ongoing maintenance dredging, since a canal that isn't kept clear can gradually lose capacity as drifting dunes encroach on its banks over time. Water first reaches the Sheikh Zayed Canal in 2003, 2 years before the Mubarak pumping station's formal inauguration in March of 2005, and that early arrival of Nile water into the desert draws immediate interest from Gulf investors eager to acquire large tracts of the newly irrigable land. Saudi-based firms including Kingdom Holding, controlled by Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, and Al-Rajhi, along with the Emirati agricultural company Al-Dahra, each receive allocations around 100,000 fedans of reclaimed land, while Egypt's own state-owned South Valley Development Company retains a smaller share around 62,000 fedans. Together, accounting for the majority of roughly 360,000 feddans distributed against an original target of 450,000. Progress on the wider vision, though, consistently lags behind the scale of the original ambition. By 2005, mounting delays forced the government to formally scale back what had been envisioned as a second construction phase, pushing the completion target for even the reduced first phase out by a decade to 2022. Political upheaval compounds the slowdown further. During and after Egypt's 2011 revolution, disputes over the land granted to politically connected investors, including the parcel controlled by Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, become a point of public and parliamentary controversy, adding legal and political uncertainty on top of the purely technical and financial delays the project was already facing. Estimates for the full realization of the original megaproject, including all planned branch canals, land reclamation, and the new urban and industrial communities envisioned to eventually house between 4 and 6 million people, run as high as $70 billion. A figure the project has never come close to fully securing or spending against its original scope. The lakes formed by decades of overflow into the Toshka Depression become their own unpredictable feature of the landscape, expanding dramatically during high flood years and shrinking or nearly vanishing during drier periods, a natural fluctuation entirely separate from, though geographically intertwined with, the engineered irrigation system running alongside them. Satellite imagery over the years has repeatedly captured this cycle. Lakes swelling to cover hundreds of square kilometers of desert during wet years, then retreating as evaporation in one of the hottest, driest regions on the planet outpaces any new inflow. In more recent years, the project has seen a partial revival under President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, with renewed attention and some new land distribution initiatives, including parcels of reclaimed Toshka land, granted to Egyptian college graduates, one feddan at a time, funded through a government-backed development fund, rather than sold primarily to large corporate or foreign investors as in the project's earlier phase. That shift reflects a broader, ongoing reassessment of what Toshka is actually for: a source of new farmland for ordinary Egyptian citizens, and a foothold for population dispersal away from the crowded Nile Valley, rather than purely a showcase project for attracting the kind of large-scale Gulf agricultural investment that dominated its first decade. Toshka's long-term relevance has also become entangled with a much larger and more contentious regional water story upstream. Ethiopia's construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile, one of the Nile's two primary tributaries, has raised concerns in Egypt over how much water will reliably continue flowing downstream once that dam reaches full operation, since Egypt depends on the Nile for the overwhelming majority of its freshwater supply, and has historically opposed unilateral upstream projects it fears could reduce that flow. Ethiopia, for its part, maintains the dam is essential to its own development and electricity needs, and has stated its operation won't be designed to significantly harm downstream users, while negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan over binding water-sharing terms have continued, with periods of progress and periods of stalemate. Without a comprehensive agreement, all three nations have fully accepted. Some analysts studying Toshka argue that a scarcer, less predictable Nile flow arriving from upstream makes committing more of Egypt's water allocation to a large westward desert diversion project riskier than it seemed when Toshka first launched in the relatively water-secure 1990s, while others maintain that domestic food security and population pressure make continued investment in reclaiming new farmland, wherever the water ultimately comes from, unavoidable regardless of how the upstream dispute eventually resolves. Nearly 3 decades after its 1997 launch, the Toshka project remains a partial version of the sweeping vision first announced under Mubarak: a functioning pumping station, a completed main canal bearing an Emirati ruler's name, hundreds of thousands rather than millions of feddans under active irrigation, and a scattering of new agricultural communities, rather than the million-strong new valley once imagined rising out of the western desert. What water does reach the Sheikh Zayed Canal today no longer simply evaporates into sand the way it did for 2 decades after the spillway's original 1978 construction. Whether that water eventually supports the full second Nile Valley Egypt originally set out to build, or remains a smaller, more modest irrigation project permanently tethered to a much larger unfinished ambition, is still, after nearly 30 years, an open question. A pumping station lifting water 50 meters out of Africa's largest reservoir. A canal named for the Gulf ruler who helped fund it, stretching toward an oasis it still hasn't fully reached. Lakes in the middle of the Sahara that grow and shrink with each year's flood, visible from orbit. And a desert valley that Egypt has spent nearly 30 years trying to turn from wasted floodwater into a second home for a growing nation. Few megaprojects illustrate quite as clearly how much distance can separate an ambitious announcement from the version of a project that actually gets built and stays operating decades later. Toshka was never abandoned outright. The pumping station still runs, the Sheikh Zayed Canal still carries water, and Egyptian farmers and college graduates alike still receive parcels of land that exist today only because that infrastructure was built. But the million-strong Second Nile Valley, promised in 1997, remains for now a partial reality rather than a finished one. A reminder that moving billions of cubic meters of water uphill through open desert is, even for a country with as much engineering ambition as modern Egypt, only ever the first and most visible half of a much longer project. If you want to see which megastructure we take apart next, hit subscribe. We're just getting started.